thank you everyone for coming, and welcome to Real Progressive's 5th monthly national outreach call. I'm Andy Kennedy. I'm a video editor and sound engineer and producer of our weekly podcast, Macro and Cheese, which I hope you're all supporting by downloading, liking, and commenting every week. If you already listened to it, thank you for supporting us. And if you haven't, it is professionally edited, very entertaining, and a great way to supplement your knowledge, not only of the MMT basics, but the way an MMT lens can affect change in all aspects of our society for the better. Tonight, we are fortunate to have two guest speakers, Lua Yule and Matthew Forstater. After editing both of their podcasts, it is not at all surprising to me that they are both teachers. There are two types of teachers: people who go to school to become teachers, and teachers who become teachers because they should. And I believe that our two guests are in the latter. After a number of wonderful conversations with Matthew, I am thrilled to consider him a friend. I have not personally been introduced or spoken to Lua, but if Matt holds her in the highest regard, then I do as well. When planning for this call, we were originally going to talk about Black History Month. But as we all know, American history is Black history. So every month should really be Black History Month. As progressives, I think we can all agree that American history should be the history of all American people. One thing is for certain: we don't talk about race and racism enough. In Lua's Macro and Cheese interview, she said that we don't have revolutionary change until white people are ready to put everything on the line. I sincerely hope she and Matt talk about that tonight. After Lua and Matt speak, we'll open the floor up to questions. Now, the way this works is we're not going to have any questions until after they are done presenting. But if you have a question, or you think of a question and you would like to ask one, please indicate in the chat on the Zoom call that you have a question, and we'll write your name down. Or if you don't want to ask it yourself, you can always type the question in and we can ask it for you. That will happen as soon as they're done their presentation. And then to end the evening, Real Progressive's founder, Steve Grumbine, will talk for a few moments and about what's going on at Real Progressives and how you can get involved. And now, to introduce our guests, I'll turn it over to my very good friend, Stephen Grumbine.
Is he here?
His name's there. He's muted. Rosie, can you unmute Steve, please?
I'm here. I thought that I was talking through my regular phone line, but apparently not.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. Sorry about that. And also, please do forgive us for timing this right in the middle of the Democratic debate. I know that's tough, so you guys are real warriors for making it here. I appreciate it immensely. And Matt and Lua, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. Really enjoyed the interview I did with each of you. And, I've known Matt for some time now, and he's one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. Just a real genuine, just a great guy. And Lua, when we were doing the interview, I think out of all the interviews that I've done, I had the most mind-blowing moments throughout. It just hearing the understanding of this kind of a various phases of wokeness, so to speak. People go through their process of trying to make sense of the world around them. And I think that I learned more from that interview than probably just about any of the other ones that I've done, and that's saying quite a bit. We've interviewed hundreds of people over the years, so just a tremendously brilliant person. So with that, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us tonight, and I will let you guys listen to the wonderful insights of both Professor Forstater and Yuille. Thank you, guys.
Well, thanks so much, Steve, Grumbine, and the whole Real Progressives crew. I think I can really say that we greatly appreciate the opportunities that you provide for us. And so I'm going to start things off by saying good evening to my colleague and very good friend, Professor Lua Yule. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Great, great. And it's great to be doing this with you. We also did a keynote panel at the 3rd Modern Money Theory Conference in Stony Brook last autumn. And I think many people in attendance or watched the video online really enjoyed that. And I know I always enjoy hearing your insights. So you are a law professor, Professor Yuille, at University of Kansas. But
sitting in my office right now.
Nice. But you also are pursuing an interdisciplinary doctorate in economics and education at UMKC. You're also part of a group that is pushing forward a project to create an alternative law and economics from that of the Chicago School variety, which is based on neoclassical economics. So my first question is, what is the value of an interdisciplinary approach to understanding complex real-world problems?
So this is like a major cliche. So I apologize and forgive me, right? But we've all heard it. We might not know what it's called. The law of the instrument, right? The golden hammer. And what does the golden hammer rule, I guess, say? It says, if the only thing you have is a hammer, every single thing looks like a nail. And in my own practice of law, I guess, it became really clear to me that lawyers look at the world and they see legal problems in a particular way, and we're trained and educated to be litigious. So we think like going to court fixes the world, rewriting legislation fixes the world. And that felt really limiting in terms of what I wanted to do. I hadn't been like that person who went through schooling wanting to be a lawyer. I had lots of interest in lots of ways, and it felt very siloed how my knowledge was developed. And again, this is not a critique, right? If we're taught and we're trained in certain ways, we want to use that training. But I wound up, I'm not a degree collector, but I have a lot of different degrees, and I'm getting more. But I wound up sort of in my legal space wanting to draw on these other things because I recognize that not everything, right? I might only have a hammer today, but not everything is a nail. And so I want to expand my toolbox,
Mm.
so I can look at problems holistically. And I think, you know, any version, right? If you're just like multidisciplinary, right? So you dabble in a lot of things, and a lot of my actual written work, I don't say this because Legal Academy doesn't like it. But the methodology that it uses is called bricolage. And bricolage is borrowed from like a French art term where you make art, you create art with just like the objects that are found. You don't, right? Like it's not like I have to do an oil painting or I have to do a sketch in pencil. It's, this is what I want to express. And whatever is gonna allow me to express the idea and understand the issue is what I'm going to use. And so that's how I've approached my scholarship. But we live in a world with real requirements. And so being an autodidact doesn't get you as far as you want to get. But also learning all of this stuff on your own will leave you with gaps in your foundational education. So pursuing this, you know, interdisciplinary degree allows me to actually get the full training in the things that I'm really, and that I'm seeing really influence the stuff that I want to do. And I think that that's, doesn't have to be at that like high educational level, right? If you are turned on and you're really interested in economics, great. And you can learn and you can find resources, but don't think that the economic question exists in a silo. It's a part of an integrated whole, and having multiple tools and multiple lenses is going to allow you to really engage that in a meaningful way.
Right. And just to follow up, so the way that the interdisciplinary PhD program works, you have a coordinating discipline and a co-discipline. Your coordinating discipline is in economics. Your co-discipline is in education. I was wondering if you could just say a few words about why you chose education as your co-discipline.
So don't get mad at me. Actually, education is sort of, in terms of my particular interest in developing formalized expertise, education is actually the leader and a lot of the impetus of my wanting to you know, not just even do sort of multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary, but really transdisciplinary work, right? I want to get to a point where we're at outside of the traditional bounds of a discipline, and education led that. So it was very nice to say that I am in the category of people who are, you know, called to teaching. I'm going to undermine the compliment because I come from a family of educators. Every single person, you know, in my family is an educator, professionally or otherwise. So I actually taught my first class ever when I was a very young fourth grader. I ran my own program by sixth grade. I wrote my own curriculum by the time I was in high school. So this is sort of the family business. And I was in New York in the middle of the financial crisis, and I was thinking about a lot of stuff as a lawyer at a very huge law firm at the center of sort of the legal response to the financial crisis. But I also was starting to see just how much our education shaped our responses to problems, and how we were trained made us see, right? This goes back to, right, if the only thing you have is a hammer, everything is a nail, right? Like how we're trained to see possibilities determines the different options we're going to pursue. And as I was, you know, sitting in my office, it was a fancier one than this, sitting in my office, slogging through 200 pages of documents, slogging through, you know, contracts and disclosure. I started to realize that the law was doing a lot of that training. And I really wanted to understand that. And I actually went and I got a master's degree in law that it was my, right, I talked about being an, autodidactic in a lot of stuff. I spent my time not taking law classes, but actually reading sort of like everything in the theory of education and the theory of curriculum and instruction. And I was pursuing that project when, really fortuitously through a conversation with some folks, they were like, hey, what you're talking about sounds a lot like what these Chicago School of Law and Economics folks are doing. And I started reading what they were doing. And then I started reading economics, and everything was not satisfactory that I found. And eventually I actually came across the work of UMKC's Fred Lee. And I was like, oh, these are my people. Yes. These are my people. And I thought, I want to explain. So this is just like my own project. I am interested in exploring how, through the law, we educate people on the economic possibilities and the economic realities and how the provisioning process must work, right? And so it became this sort of tripod. I've already got the law, and the law is doing all this work. The law's method is pedagogical, but the law's content is economic. And so that's sort of how I wound up, wanting that training. Again, I had spent all of this time doing this theoretical research in education. I had this lifelong experience in education. So as I'm sitting there deciding, what do I need rigorous training on? What do I need to understand methodologically? It was economics, and it's wound up being way more fruitful than I could have imagined, because there were things that I didn't understand and I didn't know were there in the stew, right? And so it's been really exciting.
Great. I can't tell you how happy I am that you are at UMKC. It's just really great. So many different directions we could go from here, but one is, you mentioned fourth grade, and now it's so long ago that I can sort of look at my 8-year-old self from a distance. But one day I refused to say the Pledge of Allegiance in class. And I convinced a friend of mine to join me, and we were kept after class, and the teacher asked, why didn't you say the pledge? And I immediately responded, because there is not liberty and justice for all. And I mean, I have 2 sons. I look at 8-year-old kids. I can't believe that I was able to grasp that, but without getting into a lot longer story. But in any case, why is it assumed that you have to be a woman to stand up against patriarchy and sexism, that you have to be Black to have an interest in fighting racism? Isn't an injustice to anyone an injustice for everyone?
Well, I know I was teaching. I can't tell you a lot of stories about when I was in 4th grade. Besides the fact that I had a secret candy bag that I carried everywhere. But I have a third grader. And I guess it's now been 2 years. So she was a first grader at the time. And you would have gotten along well. You know my third grader, but you would have gotten along well if you guys were age contemporaries.
Right.
Because she is, you know, that kind of aware kind of kid. And one day, you know, we were making, we baked cupcakes. This was a cupcake baking experience. So what I expected was a cupcake conversation. But somehow the conversation came to the relationship among Black people and white people. We live in Kansas, so there's not a lot of diversity in our space. We live in Lawrence, Kansas. There's not a lot of diversity in our space, and she said to me, right, so this is her reasoning process. She says, "I wish there were more Black people at my school." And I said, okay, we had this long conversation about economics, frankly, and how that was going to work. And like, right, like there's not a lot of Black people where we live. And then the, you know, socioeconomic position and the social status of the Black people here make it less likely that they're going to be at your Montessori school and blah, 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 blah. So we're going on. And then I said, wait, but why? Why do you want there to be, right? Why do you want there to be more Black people at your school? And she was like, well, you know, she's counting on her hand, which she can do, the number of Black kids. And she's like, basically, you know, to use adult, you know, terminology and phraseology, like when it goes down, we don't have enough people to fight on our team against the white people who are going to grow up and they're probably going to be racist. And so we really need more people to fight on our team because when stuff happens, I need a crew. And, you know, she's just explaining it to me. And I was like, well, and I asked the question, I'm like, can't some of the white kids who go to your school be on your team? And she said, you know what? The problem with that is that you don't know which ones are the bad ones and which ones are the good ones. I don't know who's the racist and who's the not racist. So it's dangerous to have them on my team. So then she's sitting there and we're like, oh, well, that is true. So what should we do? I asked her, what's going to be your approach? And she stopped herself. And she said, but you know what? I don't know which ones are the bad ones and which ones are the good ones. Anything could happen. Any of them can be the good ones. So what I need to do, she tells me at, you know, she's in first grade, right? What I need to do is give them a chance and see which ones are the good ones, because I'm not going to get any more Black people on my team. We live here. We're not going to have an onrush of people who look like me to be on the team. And then she asked me for the cupcake, which is what we were doing. Like, so she says this, right? She says that there's this possibility of danger, but she doesn't know. And what she needs to do is give a chance. And I tell that story, though, if you followed my Twitter feed today, you would see that I was in a little beef with a guy who suggested that narrative and storytelling is, you know, anti-objective and anti-academic, which for people to know is both racist and sexist. But anyway, I tell that story because it gets me back to where I talk about sort of like my interest. We have already arrived at a point pedagogically that my first grader understood. We are teaching, right? Through our social structures, through our law, through our economic system, we are teaching that there are teams, right? When we have, and you know, to be the lawyer, right, that I am, you know, think about anti-discrimination law. Anti-discrimination law demands of us that we create categories, because if you can't prove that some harm was done to you because you're in the category, right? Then you weren't discriminated against. Then nothing bad happened, right? So it doesn't say it's us against them, right? The law doesn't say it's us against them, but what the law does is make clear that this is an us against them situation. And so our job is to destabilize that pedagogical moment, right? Our job is to make clear, right, and to find ways to resist and push back against this education that we've received since we were babes, right? Again, I didn't tell a story about me. I told a story about my first grader. And my first grader, like you, is a woke first grader. And so, you know, we need to capitalize. I capitalized on it. It's really great, right? In that moment that you said, wait a minute, there's not liberty and justice for all. But we've got, you know, 100th graders.
Yeah.
We've got adults who need to start understanding and decolonizing their minds.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm gonna turn away from you for just a second because my
Yeah,
kids
yeah,
have
yeah.
arrived. Hey, I'll get you. Beautiful. Thank you. Sit down, girls. Go ahead.
And well, I wonder if since we're talking about education from the very starts to colonize our minds, if Andy, you could put the slide of the map up. I was going to mention that we have the standard map of the world, which hung in every classroom. The standard map was called the Mercator map, and it was incredible to me to find out that the Mercator map is completely biased and presents the world in a way that is not representative of, for example, the equator, you would think would be in the center, but actually on the Mercator map, they move the equator down. So it's like 2/3 of the way down from on the, I might have to hold it up because, yeah, here we go. So, this is not the Mercator map. This is a map that shows the, the equator in the middle. It's the Peters projection map. And the relative size of the nations and continents on this map are as they are in reality. And, in the Mercator map, you have the United States and Europe in the center, and you do not have Africa and South America and Southern Asia and so on, as they actually are in proportion to one another. And you can find a nice tutorial online. But I mean, it's just an incredible example of the way we think of maps, I suppose, as objective and value free. And yet, this gets ingrained in our mind. Oh, where I'm from is down there. And the people who are from Europe, that's it, in the center of the world. I guess, would you think this is a good example of the kind of thing you were talking about, of ingrained from the very start?
Absolutely, right? And the thing is, for me, that it's so important. I don't study socialization, right? I don't study acculturation, which are the ways, like my kids are, I travel a lot for work. You see my kids in the back, right? Like, my kids have been socialized to know how to manage hotels because we stay in hotels. My kids have been socialized to know air travel, right? That is stuff that comes from training. I'm a member of a particular religious community, right? My kids have been socialized to know what to do at a religious meeting, right? These maps are pedagogical, and what pedagogy implies, right? What it contemplates is that it's a purposeful message, right? We, the learner, may not be told that there is an aim. It's an outcome. That is the measure by which we figure out whether the education is successful or not, right? This is why they call it like the hidden curriculum, right? But it's there and it's on purpose. So we're not putting this in the center because we're just centering ourselves and we love ourselves. And I'm pointing at me as a representative of America, not as emblematic of the people who are ourselves, right? But we're putting it there so that our entire nation of children, so that the entire nation of people understand that we are at the center, right? And I love sort of thinking about the map because we also have this language comes to us from economics, right? The traditional economic wisdom tells us rules about supply and demand, right? The traditional economic wisdom tells us that, you know what? If you want a better job, if you want a living wage, just everyone demand it. And if you demand it, this is how it will work. And right, like, and these natural forces happen. And if you don't have it, you lack merit, right? And these rules, these basic rules of economics in like the MMT context, right? We are taught, right, to compare households and the government. We're taught that they're the same and that they should have the same values. We're separately taught, in America at least, that you're supposed to be independent and you're supposed to work hard. Because if you want to eat, you need to work hard. And if you want healthcare, get a job. And if you want to do all these things, you got to work for it. Because freedom isn't free, and food isn't free, and housing isn't free, right? We're taught that for our individual lives, and we're taught that the government is the same. And so then, right, when a political moment happens and people are like, hey, maybe everybody should have a job, and that job that everyone has should be at a living wage, and maybe everyone should have housing regardless of how and whether and what work they do, right? And maybe everybody should have access to healthcare, because if we have something called a right to life, maybe you need healthcare for that, right? And we are trained, right? Even myself, I'm not gonna lie, right? I have to actively dissuade my instinctual thought, how do I pay for it? It's not ingrained in me born. Come here, Amantha, come here. This kid right here, I'm gonna show you this kid, but she's slow. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up.
Oh.
Now, this is a not accurate scholarship, right? I also don't sit around talking with this kid about the finer points of economic thinking, right? But this kid right here has asked the questions. Wait, Mom, why don't we just give everyone a house? Why are there homeless people? I said, oh, well, them's the breaks. Not everybody has money. Well, why don't we just give people money?
Mm-hmm.
She said, well, of course I responded, well, that's not how money is distributed. And she was like, well, who makes the money? It's like the government makes the money. She says, so why doesn't the government give all the homeless people money for houses, right? So this isn't, when I say I instinctively have to dissuade myself, this isn't ingrained, born natural instincts, which is another fallacy, right? Because this current first grader who said this when she was in preschool, right, was able to say, that doesn't make any sense. The pay for question is stupid. So our natural understanding of the world makes it clear that, like, we can just give people, in some sense, the things that are necessary. Like I said, she was, how old are you, 6? She was 3 or 4. So, right, she's not doing sophisticated economic analysis. But the natural conclusions are there. And what we do when we send her to school, right? And what we do when we turn on the television, and what we do when we teach her about money, is dissuade her of these very fundamental ideas, which are, it is at least possible for everyone to have a house. It is possible for everyone to have employment. And if we choose to use money as a distributor of resources, it is possible to ensure that the minimum necessary resources come and are available to everyone, right? And if a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old can get that before they've been brainwashed and colonized by these false messages, we should be able to deprogram adults.
Right. Well put. Love it. I'm going to switch it up a little bit. I had my first college class, 1983, Temple University, Department of Pan-African Studies, of course, Introduction to the Black Aesthetic, taught by poet Sonia Sanchez, and it was a life-changing experience for me. The professor is such a powerful communicator, and the main theme, in a sense, of the course was that in the history of the African American freedom struggle, politics and culture are inseparable. And if we think about the role of music and arts, and then the political and struggle for social justice, that's very different than the way that art is viewed traditionally in the West, or you know, coming out of the European, Euro-American tradition, because art kind of gets depoliticized in the museums. And I was wondering if you might speak a little bit about the role of politics and culture.
You know, I think it's, so there's a couple of critical pedagogues out there. One is named Henry Giroux, and another is named Peter McLaren. And they've got issues. Largely, they've got issues on, you know, in my view, race and gender. So they like to white man all over the place. But they do good white manning, because the things that they're saying are right. They need to cede some space to other voices. That being said, I love them and I love their work. And they've spent a lot of time, you know, I'm harping on this pedagogy thing, looking at the educative function of culture and art in particular. And they have really great literature that talks about this depolitization of music and art in the West, and how, once again, it's not an accident, it's on purpose. And they are, you know, paradigmatic anti-neoliberalists. So right, they assign this function, right, to our obsession, right? Our obsession with the market, right? We got to sell things, and selling and market principles and market instincts are the central, the core. It's a way to assign value and to identify all good. And if you create a cultural cult around the market, what you're gonna see, right? Rap music is a really great example of, or hip hop, I should say more broadly, not just rap music. Hip hop as a movement, as a cultural space, which had elements, right? There's b-boying, there's DJing, there's graffiti, right? All of these things emerge as cultural resistance, sites of cultural resistance, and educative projects, right? Graffiti is not just expression. Graffiti, right, the role of it is to publicly teach us about the conditions in an area, right? The hip hop graffiti, maybe not, you know, gang graffiti. We can have a different conversation about that, right? originally the conversations in rap music, right, are again both resistance expression but also educative expression, teaching us about the conditions of Black people in the inner city, right? We can see that, right? That's the same project that slaves in the old Negro spirituals, right? That is the same project, right? They were stripped of their language,
Yes.
and had to reteach the values through the music, but also engage in political resistance. Not always widespread, we're burning down the plantation political resistance, but the political resistance of, keeping their humanity. If you go to Hawaii, it's the same thing. So like you go to Hawaii and you go to like the hula dance thing, and it turns out when the United States stole Hawaii from Hawaiians, they again outlawed the language of those people, right? And the music and the dance, which was a spectacle for white colonizers from the United States, also served a politically resisting function, because that's why it's so much storytelling. They actually used to sing in their language and tell stories, but when that was outlawed, they had to make the movements tell the stories, again, to retain humanity, because they weren't kicking out Americans. So
Right.
this is tightly tied together. But when we, think post-Enlightenment European values that get grafted on to cultural performance around the world, you very frequently get this divorce. Though we can go to Europe and we see the same thing, right? This is why you have Irish dancers, right? This is why you have, there's a really great project in Edinburgh, in Glasgow right now, of publicly resisting art again, right? So this is not, it's sort of like an education project that happened to come out of Europe, but the natural connection between cultural performance, between politics, between art, music, and politics is there, and has been there. And I'm not an art historian, but I imagine an art historian could go on and on.
No, I think that really ties together with some of the other things that we've been talking about, the interdisciplinary, and breaking down the walls between, just the walls that divide us in any way. And I'm thinking back, we had the chance to have Andres Bernal last summer for 2 months. He was in residence in the department. And so, we got to talking quite a bit, and he was sharing about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's experience at Standing Rock. So apparently she had sort of an epiphany when she was there that was at once political, moral, and spiritual. And traditionally, on the left, talking about spirituality or religion is sort of poo-pooed. And when I see the young people, the Sunrise Movement, that are working so hard, and the young people who are out there in the struggle, and the daily struggle, it can get at times exhausting. It can get at times discouraging. Watching the news can really just make you want to crawl up in a ball. And in the history of the African American freedom struggle, the role of spirituality in providing the energy and the stamina to continue on. It seems to me that in addition to, you know, the institutional stability of the Black church in the community, those kinds of issues, that there is something more that inner transformation is part of the total struggle, is it not?
And I think we can even take it further.
Okay.
Right? And so, you know, on my Macro and Cheese podcast, right, I said white people have to put stuff on the line, but we talked about, right, like, and you brought up, how do we create unity? And so the spiritual element in an individual way has all of these great functions, right? It creates space, it creates resilience, or it helps foster resilience. But it's also a real project for centering marginalized communities. Now, I can't speak to every community of color, right? But you already said it. Civil rights movement had a center within the Black church, right? And not necessarily the capital Black church of, you know, Christ is really important, but a lowercase Black church of an institutional space of solidarity with a spiritual foundation, right? We talk about Standing Rock, right? I don't presume to be able to adequately or accurately reflect the varying native cultures, but I can say that when you go in those spaces, they are deeply spiritual.
Yes.
Right? You want to get Latinx communities as a part of your movement. This is why those liberation theology, right? In Latin America, revolution is run by Catholic priests, right? And we can have long conversations about the particular religions and the particular institutional problems. But how do revolutions get run by clergy? Real revolutions get run by clergy? Well, they get run by clergy because the people have deeply committed spiritual orientations. I go to this annual Black Women Law Professors Conference, and I remember the first time I went, I was floored. Because we're all, and you know, we're Black women professors, which means we have the most elite possible credentials, because if we didn't, we couldn't get jobs anywhere. So there are all these people from the Ivy Leagues who have all of these elite credentials, who are really good at traditional science and traditional economic thinking. And they want to open up with prayers, and they're telling stories about how what they did at church. And I'm like, and everybody's just openly religioning all over the place.
Right.
And that's not okay. And so if you really want to bring in broadly communities, that's not to say that there's not, you know, people of color who don't and are not interested in religious engagement or spiritual activation. Let's say that. Spiritual activation. But when you act like spirituality is irrelevant, when you act like spirituality is anti-progressive, when you act like spirituality is anti-intellectual, what you tell masses of people who have used their spiritual space, just like you described, Matt, which is to survive, to claim their humanity, to thrive, or at least look towards thriving, given the depressed conditions in which they find themselves. When you tell them that it's off the table, then I'm not a part of your fight, and I don't want to be a part of your fight, and you reassert that it's us versus them. Because this atheism stuff, this we don't have any spirituality, this you're dumb if you're spiritual, is culturally coded as both white and male, which excludes even the like non-spiritual person of color, because it's so culturally raced, it's so gendered, that you might not want to participate. You might not be able to get on fire about it.
Thank you. Well. Might I say amen? I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I think, we've so many examples, obviously Cornell West, we could, go on and on, but you say it includes because, it's a very personal thing, but the solidarity that can be created just, I mentioned Sonia Sanchez, and beginning of the semester, end of the semester, everyone would get in a circle holding hands, and they would go around and have an opportunity to just say thank you, or, whatever it is. But it's such a simple thing, and yet so powerful and pretty much I was always the only white person, and sometimes even the only man in a lot of my Black Studies classes. So, I appreciated and was so humbled by how I was treated. And, I always tried to take my education back to white people and men, and so I could convey to them. And it really is, I have so much appreciation for my teachers. I mean, it's just incredible. And I'm also, often humbled by the appreciation that's expressed to me by my students. And so I think maybe we should open it up for some questions from the listeners. Is that okay with you, Lua? Okay. What do you think, Andy?
Well, I'd like to say on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for that presentation. That was amazing. I love the interaction between the two of you. That was great. All right. So if anybody has any questions, please indicate to us that that you have one, and we'll unmute you.
Or comments, and while we're waiting for that, Professor Yuille, if you have any additional thoughts you wanted to share, because I sort of was asking you all questions, but it maybe is some topics that I didn't cover that you'd like to touch on as well.
No, though I think it's important, to be clear, right? Like I think I liked spiritual engagement where I landed, right? Because let's not be confused. There's been a lot of harm done by religion or religious institutions, specific religious institutions.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that that's the conversation we're having, right?
Absolutely.
The fact that a lot of people's spirituality is pegged to those institutions suggests sort of a balance that has to be looked for. But it's not to say, right, like I brought up Catholicism. It is not to say, let's not think about the particular institutional infirmities. It's saying, look at the power of that as a motivator in communities. When we're in the process of thinking about organization and the process of thinking about how we come together.
Let me share something really quick with you on that, because it's just incredible to me. I had a student, a female student from China, and she had brought into her dissertation proposal some of the principles of Daoism and Buddhism. And I had not one, but two colleagues on the committee from the economics department, people who everyone listening right now know of, who basically said, I can't be on this committee. And one unbelievably wrote in the comment, organized religion is the cause of all the world's problems. I mean, you know, like, I do not understand that. But the thing is that we've had many students who say, draw on critical realism or another, you know, philosophy to build up their methodology. And there was no difference between that and the work that this young woman was doing. And yeah, it just showed so much ignorance, prejudice, Eurocentrism, racism, and so on that, you know, anyway, I'm happy to say that we replaced them on the committee with two of my other colleagues, and both of the new colleagues gave them, gave the young woman honors in, you know, her, yeah.
Wow.
Not any, you know, thing from me. Okay, Jabari, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this talk that you have, because I have this talk all the time with other people, including my own fiance, that don't understand how pervasive this whole Calvinistic attitude of we have to work hard in order to get things, not understanding that working hard isn't how people have succeeded. Is most people have succeeded, but because of how they look or who they know. And that at the end of the day, in a country, you know, let's forget country, a world like this here, where we have the resources to take care of people, why are we not doing it? Anybody got an answer for that?
Yes, racism, sexism, misogyny, classism, and like, honestly, there's no other answer. And we've got to get comfortable saying, right, like, I call it the cult of scarcity, by the way, and I think racism, classism, misogyny are just ways of perpetuating the cult of scarcity. This is why, and again, I have lived part of my life as a person who was super into fashion, right? Super American, that your expression through your clothes matters. When I was trained as a child, and I'm not gonna lie, I have this conversation with my nephews. Why do you want to look like everybody else? Right? I used to like those Croc shoes because they were really uncomfortable, or because they were really comfortable, excuse me. And then everybody got Crocs. And when everybody got Crocs, I was like, peace out. They weren't cute in the first place. Why? Because its value came from me having these special shoes from abroad, right? We do that, and we extend it down to the very things that we need to live. And in order to make sure that I got something that you don't have, we've got to make Black people at a different place on a hierarchy, because at the end of the day, we've got these intersecting things, right? So class is there. Not all white people can be rich, because scarcity doesn't work if all the white people are rich. So we got to have some of the white people be poor, but they're poor because of class, right? And they're cut poor because of this. And the Black people also have to have these categories. It's all about this cult of scarcity. If we don't say it.
Absolutely. I think Roseanne has a question. Roseanne, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much, because I'm a little bit older than Matt, and I think a lot older than Professor Yuille here. You are absolutely what teachers, educators, need to be. One of the best teachers I ever heard did not want to teach people. And he was Mr. Aristocratic. Oh, talk to students? Oh no, you don't do that. And why do we do this? What is teaching and learning about? Your children have to go out there, Lua, and show them. And show them. Anytime I wanted to show people in the 50s, I was the goofy one, okay? Something was wrong with me. I was the kid who talked funny, who didn't have the right kind of clothes, all that kind of crap, okay? Why? Because I was listening to that garbage. But, old person that I am, Grumbine turned the light on for me. And then I meet all these great people at the MMT. Oh my God. You gotta do it. I'll keep telling her. You know I'll stop anybody who stops long enough to listen. We gotta tell them, Lua, honey, get those kids out there. Get them. Send them over to me. I need them in Nevada. We gotta do this. We gotta do this. Every burner person who comes here to my house gets a little MMT lesson. And I give them all your videos.
And muffins.
Yeah, and muffins. Please go ahead. We gotta share. That's what we have to do. That's it. That's all.
Thanks, Rosie. That's awesome. Do we have any other questions?
I think Roxanne.
Oh, can you unmute Roxanne, please, Rosie?
Oh, I don't think Rebecca can. She just said she's on the radius road, so I don't think she can talk.
Did she write a question in?
Oh, she was responding to the conversation about spirituality, and as a Christian, she was saying that she's basically stopped saying that she's a Christian because it means something. It's not the Christianity that, what does she say? Oh God, I just lost it. It's why I don't call myself a Christian anymore. Not for lack of faith, but because the orthodoxy does not represent the Jesus I know, the one who overturned the money changers' tables and healed on the Sabbath.
Well, and I mean, we live in a culturally Christian country where Christianity dominates. And I totally appreciate the diffidence that some Christians have around talking about Christianity, given how it's been co-opted by, oppressive movements, like separate from the history of organized religion, right? How it's been co-opted today, right? In the law, Christianity is being used as the shield. I get to discriminate. I get to hurt because I'm a Christian. So I get that, but at the same time, right? Just as much as we need young folks, like real young folks, not like me, but like actual young folks to be at the forefront of possibilities because their brains have a level of plasticity that mine don't or ours don't, right? We also need Christians in this space to say, not my Jesus, not my Christianity, right? And, people are super happy to demand of Muslims that they say, not my Muhammad, right? Not my Islam. But we need Christians to say, not my Christianity, because this is the project. It's a project of a universal and a radical love. That's what, I'm not Christian, but that's what Christianity is about, right? And we need Christians to say that, so that when people like me say stuff like Christianity is a radical project, Jesus was a radical, right? I've got backup. And so we got to find that space so that Christians who find Christianity as the center of their identity can come and come back to the radical movement that they're a part of. In the same way, every religious tradition was a radical movement, right? And it was a radical movement for liberation, each in their time. And getting folks to be back in that conversation and understand that liberation means that we got to have the means to survive, right? And this is, you know, taking us back to economics, right? That's what we're doing. We're reproducing society. We're provisioning the needs to reproduce society, right? And religion's job, at least in the physical world, is to help us do that in a healthy way, right? In a way that gets everybody their needs met. And having that discourse around faith and spirituality is so hard to do, because the loudest voices on Christianity are telling me that the role of Christianity is to ensure that some people don't use somebody else's bathroom. And you're like, wait, what? I'm really positive that that's not what Jesus was about. Like, I don't, like, but I'm not a Christian, so I don't have any authority in that space.
If I could just add in, like, so in order, you know, to be as inclusive as possible, even, you know, atheists, I have been sort of repeating this line that about can we unify around the idea of commitment to a life-affirming principle, that all life is dignified and respect-worthy, and then that has ethical implications. So it is not okay to talk to others in an insulting and degrading manner, especially if one is president of the United States. Yet, what kind of model is our current president for young people? It seems like it's opened up, it's okay to be rude. It's okay to be racist and sexist. We have to unify, stand up and say, no, it is not. It is not okay. And he does not represent all whites. He does not represent all men. He does not represent all Christians in any way, shape, or form.
That's perfect. Thanks, Matt. Okay, listen, I think Virginia has a question. Virginia?
Yeah, before we release Professor Yuille to her children, I would like you to talk a little bit about how we should be thinking about intersectionality versus class and internationalism and identity politics. I find there's so much confusion about these issues. It's like Bernie being criticized of only focusing on class. Well, I think you know what I'm asking. I would like to hear your thoughts on finding a balance.
So I guess the number one thing for me, or I guess the goals for me, from my perspective, I spend a lot of time. I tell people I'm interested in actual reality, right? So we use jargon to signify that we know things. And very frequently that jargon is not used right? And so there's this bad word of identity politics. But all identity politics is really, and the phrase was coined to reflect, right, that our political engagement reflects and is motivated by a different identity positions, right? Understanding that is, it's not like a revolutionary idea. It's really laying bare what was always true, right? In the identity politics as a term is really comes from Black feminism, and they're saying this is why law benefits white men, because white men are making the law. And so our politics has to be informed by our identity positions, right? Intersectionality does no work. It's not a useful, it's not a movement, right? What it is a way of describing reality that suggests, and there's multiple marginality, there's lots of ways, but the one that captured the attention of folks is to talk about, is to use the term intersectionality. It does no work. All it does is say, right, that our different identity positions are not they're not aggregative, they're not siloed, they work together so that they're alchemy, right? And so my experience as a Black woman is not, and I just chose two of my many identities, right? But my experience as a Black woman isn't Black man plus white lady equals me, right? My experience as a Black female religious minority from a Black middle class, right? Because there's no such thing as a middle class. I'm from a Black middle class, which means my family has less wealth than a white middle class family, right? But these things combine in ways that don't equal the sum of the generally centralized or centered position. That's all it does. It's just a descriptor. And so how do we balance these things? We actually engage what I think the background critique is, right? And so if the critique, let's say, of a Bernie Sanders is that you're insufficiently talking about other vectors of identity, one, we engage with other vectors of identity, but we also complicate our class analysis. Like I just said, there's no such thing as a middle class that's Black and white and Latinx and Asian. They mean different things by mere virtue of my Blackness having different wealth implications, and being in the middle for Black is actually lower than white. What it meant for me to, right? But in other ways, frankly, there's a lot of performative class things that a middle class white person does that I do very differently, right? So I'm a middle class Black person, but I was flying all over the country when I was a kid in the early 80s, not the early 80s, in the early 90s and in the 80s, right? And that was not the standard of America at that time. So it's complicated. And, again, in terms of organizing, what we need to do is engage that complication and recognize. And so, I don't advise Bernie Sanders. But if I did advise Bernie Sanders, when I was asked to engage more fully with different vectors of identity, if class is my center, and frankly it is, it's not a critique of Sanders to suggest that his real concern, prioritizes class, it would be to say, well, but this class analysis has this racialized implication and has this gendered implication and has this implication for LGBTQIA communities and has this religious implication, because I know those things matter to everyone. And I think that that's hard because it gets us out of our wheelhouse. And frankly, there's a reason that Marx focused on class, right? It's compelling, and focusing on one thing is easy. There's a reason that race crits focus on race, right? It's compelling, and you can tell a neat story. But if we're coalition building, we've got to recognize people's interests. Don't become defensive about it. And I think that's true for all of us who are on the ground out there stumping for people, right? So when I look on Twitter, I'm on Twitter all the time, and people critique Sanders on race, what I see back is, no, you're wrong, no, you're wrong, no, you're wrong. Instead of, this is how the positions that I see from Sanders would apply or be relevant in a racialized context. And I'm sure that Bernie understands that, right? If you, I mean, I'm not out there doing these things, but the people who are making these critiques are going to be probably a lot more receptive if that's the response. And then they're probably going to push back with, well, I wish Bernie would say that, in which case,
Yeah, me too.
exactly, like, right, okay.
Thank you
The
so
un-
much.
The unfortunate thing about using Bernie Sanders as an example there is that there's currently a push in mainstream media to try to vilify him in any possible way. So it's
Sure.
not really a good time to bring him up as an example.
Well, yeah, and right, like, so a lot of critiques are not good faith critiques, and like that's an aside, right? Like, well, that's not actually an aside. That's important too, because we need to be thoughtful enough and understand the terms of the game enough to see when it's good faith and when it's not good faith. And if it's not good faith, the appropriate response, just like you do to a troll, is to not respond.
Hmm.
And I think that comes with developing your own facility, right, with some of this stuff. So yes, I agree, right? Like there was a critique of Bernie Sanders being anti-Semitic, and you're just like, and I'm not the person, in fact, I tweeted about this, I was not the person who said he's not an anti-Semite because he's Jewish, right? It's like, he's not an anti-Semite because he's not an anti-Semite. And like, right, like, we haven't seen actions that suggest anti-Semitism. There are Jewish people who are out there promoting anti-Semitism. They're agents of anti-Semitism all over the place. It just doesn't happen to be Bernie Sanders. So there's a point at which it devolves into idiocy. And you can see that in, you know, not just for Bernie Sanders, across a lot of political candidates. I can't necessarily say that there's, you know, that the current occupant of the White House is a more complicated case in terms of good faith versus bad faith critiques, because there's a lot of space for bad faith critiques to still be right. But I think that that's absolutely an important thing to think about. You know, hashtag don't feed the trolls is both annoying, but also sometimes really, really true. And it's hard when you're passionate about, you know, it's really hard when you're passionate about the particular candidate. And I think it gets exacerbated in the case of Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders is as close to a revolutionary that we've got in American politics. And so if you're really committed to the revolution, in particular, the revolution that he could augur, let's not say that I don't think Bernie Sanders is a revolutionary. I don't think he's that radical, but the revolution that could be augured by Bernie Sanders, it's that much harder not to get into the lack of good faith fray.
Excellent, very good. Okay, so does anyone have any further questions? And does anybody
Could
see
I, Andy?
Yes, sir.
I think I just want to let people know that if they have questions, you know, later on, I mean, please, you can always, you know, multiple ways of contacting us. So please don't hesitate.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's something that you think of later that you want to ask of our guests, any one of us at Real Progressives would be able to reach out and make sure that they get that question. And I know that Matt likes to get back to people very quickly, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
I don't. Sorry. If I don't respond quickly, just reach out again. It tends to mean I responded in my brain. And my brain did not communicate it with my fingers to the appropriate device.
Okay,
believe me, there's 134 people out there that when Andy said that are saying he's got to be joking.
I was just trying to be kind.
And those of us who know him know that he was indeed.
Am I that readable? Am I an open book? I didn't realize that. Oh. All right. So
I see a
guess-
comment open.
do we have
Gregory has a comment.
Hi, I'm Gregory Mallard. I'd like to also add something about all of this. What we need to do to pretty much bridge the divides in our country is to have progressive legislation to pretty much come forth that would work for everyone, that would work for everyone amongst all income classes, bridge that divide, instead of having it be so fractured and broken like our society is today. And something else that I would like to see is the federal job guarantee, which would seriously, and I mean seriously, bridge the divides, because when you guarantee these people who really want the work, who are out of work, the federal job guarantee would come in and bridge the divides to pretty much curb the poverty we have today. And it would pretty much bring all classes of people together, whether it's race, religion, what have you. It would pretty much unite the country to pretty much end poverty as we know it. And that's why I support the federal job guarantee. And if there's a candidate who's running for office and they do not have the federal job guarantee on their platform, I'm not wasting my time supporting them, and I am not wasting my time even voting for them. That's where I cross a line. You've got to support the federal job guarantee, which is going to pretty much solve every single issue that we're faced with, along with the Green New Deal, along with Medicare for all, possibly a national health service, tuition-free education, and so forth. That's the only way we as a society will come together and pretty much be totally bridged.
Thanks, Gregory. Cool.
Gregory, can I say one quick thing?
Yes.
I love everything that you've said, but I want to be I want to rain on the parade, which is the most important thing that you said was as we know it, right? I think that everybody who's in the fight, however you are in the fight, needs to understand that even if you win tomorrow, the fight will not be done, right? All of our problems, class, race, gender, as problems, as dividers of society, and I've said this many times, are technological. They evolve. And so when we get a federal jobs guarantee to end poverty as we know it, we will have other forms that we need to continue to combat. And so I just think it's really important for all of us to know that this is a fight for eternity. And if you are a true warrior of justice, if you truly believe in justice, you need to understand that it's you and it's them and it's their kids. And as long as we have an earth, if we save it, it will continue to be the ongoing obligation to have calls like this, trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing, because it's not an endpoint. Ending oppression, ending poverty, ending racism is not an endpoint. It is an ongoing vocation of humanity.
That's very true. And Jeremy Corbyn, the outgoing UK Labour Party leader, says, think of the next generation, because that's what true leaders are supposed to do. And I'm looking at your children. That's the reason why I'm in this fight. It's not because of me. It's not because of our generation. I'm a millennial. I'm not in this for my generation. I'm in it for the next generation, because I'm fearful of what they're going to have to go through next.
Thanks.
I live in fear for what the next generation is going to have to go through. And that's why I am so passionate about MMT and every core component of the Green New Deal that will continue to evolve, like you said, and will thrive for generations to come. We've got to teach the next generation everything we know and pass it down to them in order for them to pass it down to their children and their children pass it down to their children. We've got to keep this revolution going strong for generations to come. It doesn't end with us. It's going to have to continue going. and it's going to have to be up to us to teach the next generation the right things.
Right.
Thanks, Gregory. Thank you very much, buddy.
You're welcome.
Okay, I would say that we are now at the point where if there are don't see any
Nope.
more questions. Okay.
For Steve.
Yes. So I think that thank you so much to Matthew and Lua. That was absolutely wonderful. I don't think I'm just speaking for myself. I think that very, very thankful that you guys were able to join us tonight. And I look forward to further conversations. And I'm going to probably be writing questions all night that I'm going to send to Lua that she'll never answer. But, you know, that's just the way it goes. So
I feel
thank
so
you again.
seen.
Again, well, thank you. So if you want to stick around, please do. If not, if you have to go, again, thanks. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Steve Grumbine.
And thank you guys so much. This was really, really, really insightful. As usual, I really enjoyed. We have some great guests come through. This is like just an absolute ton of riches that we just get. It's almost obscene how much wonderful knowledge gets brought to these calls. And Lua and Matt, thank you both so much for. I mean, you didn't mail it in. You really put it on the line. You did great, and I thank you for that. It means a lot to me. With that said, you know, for those of you all who know everything that goes on here, what I'm about to say will probably be a bit of a repeat. But for those of you who are new or maybe haven't been engaged in a while, Real Progressives is now a 501c3. And Real Progress in Action is now a 501c4. And as a result, we now are, you know, we shed the title of being a Facebook group, and we can start getting to the business of making change happen. And we were already doing that before, and we've made some really great inroads. A lot of people over the years have been impacted by our work and by the guests that we brought in. I'd like to see that continue to grow. With that said, we just recently picked up a new studio setup for all of our live streams and video recordings and stuff called Live Studio 6. And this is an incredible switcher studio that will basically turn us into like a full-blown news outlet. I mean, we are going to be able to do things that you've never seen before unless you're watching the mainstream television. The difference will be that it will be through an MMT lens, and it will be highly intersectional. And you're going to start seeing some real significant changes here. One thing that came out of this conversation tonight and Lua's previous interview with me is that, you know, it's like until white people start putting it on the line and really, you know, falling on the sword, things aren't going to change. And until Real Progressives take our mission as seriously as Lua put it out there, we need to see this as a true calling, as an opportunity to be in the position to fall on that sword, not as a passing hobby. I really see us as the tip of the spear and have an opportunity to make substantive change by being inclusive and really putting all of ourselves into this fight with everything we've got. And so as we go forward, I'm hoping that we've got some initiatives. One of them is to bring in Microsoft Office 360. I don't know what that is, but if somebody could use that one line for me, it would be really helpful. But the hope is that we will be able to leverage these office tools so that we can get organized. The enemy that we fight out there is not just a belief system or anything else like that. It is an actual well-oiled machine, a very, very, come on up here, Butterfish. My son's coming here. the idea here is that we are fighting a very, very organized, entrenched enemy. And it takes an organization like ours to be able to fight back. So I hope each of you find ways to contribute and be involved. And I'm sorry, my son has, he's just broken into the party. Yes, buddy. Okay, let's go in the room. I'll be right out there. Let's go. Let's go. So with that, my son is going to cut me off short here. And I'm going to just say thank you guys very much for joining tonight. And I look forward to seeing you on the flip side.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks
You're
so
welcome.
much, Steve, and all of you for all the great work you do.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly take over for Steve here for just a couple of minutes. We're always looking for new people to help us volunteer at Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. We're constantly looking for people with different skill sets as far as writing or video editing or audio editing or HR or any type of skill set that we could use in the business. We're absolutely love to have people come out and volunteer for us. It's a great organization to be a part of. We have all kinds of different people from different parts of the world. We have most of our volunteers are from the US, of course. I myself am from Canada, and we have a number of different people from Australia. So it's an international organization as well. And we'd love to have you. If you're thinking about volunteering for a great progressive group, this is one to do it. Would anybody else like to say anything?
I would like to say it was just a great call. Their conversation went into great depth on a lot of the issues that we're dealing with as a country or world, and to be honest, even as a spiritual body. So we always have to remember that everything we do it in love, and that's the only reason.
Well, if there's no other comments or questions from anyone, I guess we could possibly end the call a little bit early. Thank you, everyone, very much for coming out. That was absolute wonderful presentation. I hope that you got as much out of it as I did. I thought that was absolutely wonderful. And I can't, just think of how unbelievable Lua is and her perspective and just her ability to teach and to convey her thoughts and ideas. And it's you expect that you probably hear from her quite a bit through her career. I'm really looking forward to like I said before, to further conversations in that regard. So thanks everyone for coming, and I guess we'll all talk to you very soon.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay.
Lua, the real you came out tonight, okay? The real you. The wonderfully sophisticated professor is who I heard on Macro and Cheese, which inspired me to write a column. But tonight, this is you. This is you. No, this is what you're supposed to do. We all have our place, right? We have our talent where we're supposed to make friends and influence people. And we influence them with our personalities, with the truth. Some people don't want to listen to the truth. That's their fault. That's their fault. But you excite people. You have something it's inspiring. It's magical. It's what teachers are supposed to be. We're all, each one teach one. We're all supposed to be teachers, but we can't do it like you can. Okay?
They're too kind, too kind.
That's right. I have a question for Matthew.
Yes.
What temperature is it at your house right now?
Inside or outside?
Outside.
Outside, must be around, what, 39 degrees? What is it, Lua? Lua and I in the same.
Too cold. Yeah, I was like, at Matt's house, it's the same temperature as my house.
Well, yeah, but I know him better than you. So if I'm going to stay with somebody till April, it's going to be him.
Yes, please.
It's
about -10 here. Okay.
Oh!
It's 80
we're
degrees
beachside
here
over
in
here.
Florida.
Also, yesterday it was like 50. So we had a really
Right.
nice one yesterday.
Is that good or
5
bad?
days ago, it was 7
Seems
degrees.
bad.
Lua,
I was in Iowa
Climate
5 days
change.
ago.
Lua, you know what we call 50 degrees in Canada? T-shirt weather.
Summer.
Right?
I was about to say summer.
I was happy. I am from
In
California.
Jabari State, it would be winter.
Well, exactly. Like my family is like,
Oh,
you
down
poor baby.
Jabari, it's sweater weather at 50.
Yeah, trust me. When it's 50 degrees, I see everybody starting to put on their hoods and stuff. I'll be like, what? It's only 50. And I'm a neighbor. I don't see everybody else's excuse. Yeah.